Shannon Leitz from Intuit.
Hi, guys. So I'm really excited to be here at LastCon. Amazing venue. I walked in and there were so many people here. I was like, wait, am I in the right place? And I realized, yeah, actually it's Friday and there's an amazing amount of AppSec talent in this space and it's growing, and that's an amazing place to be. So the reason why I'm here is to talk to you a little bit about quality. Not really, actually. So my talk is about securability. You probably haven't heard of it yet, because that's what I do. I do things like DevSecOps, and now I'm doing securability. And so if you want to do something big, try to do something big, right? Have goals, and that's how I'm going to get this started. So here, for most of you, I've seen some in the room here. I know a lot of faces, which is awesome, because this is my 4th time back, I believe. Unless I can't count, which could be possible. And I'm doing a whole lot of stuff now. I've been in this industry for a really long time. I tell people not to become dinosaurs, but I think I am a dinosaur. I've been in here for a really long time trying to do things, everything from coding to doing crazy security things and really taking on hard challenges. I want to make a shout out to an amazing effort that I really believe in, and if you haven't seen it yet, you need to go check this out. It's called Dear Auditor. Why does that matter to all of us that want to really just break into stuff and hack and do AppSec? Well, guess what? There's auditors out there, and they do matter, and the things that they think about are really important, and they shape and form a lot of our industry. And I think this is just an incredible thing that the DevOps community is doing, which is, Dear Auditor, we forgot you. And I think it's also a tribute to the fact that I think the DevOps community is really figuring out that they also left security behind. And this is a way for us to actually get security to be more relevant to our developer friends. So I also wanted to go take a snapshot of the new look and feel of the OWASP stuff, because I really believe that having a new look and feel for the site is really an important thing. So if you haven't seen it yet, there's like in the mobile security project section, I actually do read this site, like a lot. There's actually a link to the new site, which is super cool looking, and I can't wait until they get it up and running more functionally. Or I'm even on the wrong site and I just don't know, and you're gonna have to tell me afterwards. So maybe, you know, I kind of peruse these things very frequently. There's also a super cool new project that was announced in Tel Aviv. If you haven't seen it, it's the API security project for all of us AppSec people. That's a big deal. You're dealing with more and more APIs. I find them to be fascinating. They have things like problems and security challenges that most of us have been working on for a really long time, but there's an actual project now dedicated to it. So with that said, my talk starts with a pointy-headed boss. And once upon a time, I wanted to be a comic artist, but apparently I'm not very good at it. So this is as good as it gets. And my pointed-headed boss, he basically said, you know, we really need to make security less surprising. And I said, okay. And he said, we need to have test coverage and metrics. And I said, that sounds a lot like quality. And for those who don't know, a lot of the CISOs I've worked for in my career have had very few years of security experience, but they come from all walks of life, business, quality, you name it. And most of the time they think that you can do this. Anybody know of a test coverage standard for security? Run it and you're good, nothing's gonna ever happen? Anybody? Oh, come on, I'm looking everywhere in this world right now for a test coverage standard. And there's a lot of things out there. There's the MITRE standards, there's all sorts of things with CVE, we can test a lot of stuff, but nobody seems to be interested in this. So, well, you know me, sounds hard, no one else is doing it. So why not? Let me go look for this. Yeah, I know, I kind of look a little crazy now, right? She's looking for test coverage. Security test coverage, that's almost like predicting the stock market is what I said back to him. And he said, well, when you get good at that, I guess you'll be a billionaire. All right, so I'm on a quest. and excited about it. So again, you know, I do things like crazy change and bang my head here is really, I have this sign in my office for those who don't know. It's metal, and whenever I hit my head on it, it actually makes a sound and everybody realizes that I'm breaking new ground. So it all starts with 99. And if you're gonna do anything crazy, you go back to the '80s. And when I look back at the '80s, in the 1970s, there was a paper that was developed by General Electric and the Air Force. And in the paper, they went through this whole research project, 55 characteristics of quality software. 55. They boiled it down to 11. Along the way, they left off a few things. Apparently, in the last 11, there's nothing named security in it. They're kind of hidden into integrity. So apparently, we all are working on building software integrity. That's really what we do here, according to the 1976 paper. And I thought that was interesting because what it told me is we're all striving for building security in anybody, everybody, right? Because we all use this software that's actually helping us drive our cars, and I actually make toast that likes to figure out how warm it should be. And when you get down to it, we really want to figure out, how does this affect us? What does software look like? If you're going to go do something, how do you measure security for software? Now, I will tell you that I sat in many rooms over the course of this last couple of years listening to people say, how do we measure security? How many people have huge dashboards, lots of metrics, they're constantly looking to figure out how to get their security stuff in there somewhere so that somebody at the top of the business is actually going to care about it? Anybody? Or like the people above you, maybe, I don't know. But when it comes down to it, I'm a security geek. I like to do things like break into applications, figure out what's wrong with them, and tell people, hey, this isn't good, this is how you gotta fix it, and hopefully it gets software to be better. But in the end, it's still ROI for a company, how valuable is the job that we do, and I figured out that along the way, you have to have a security measure that matters. So why does 99 matter? Well, back in the day, when the internet started to become a thing, we actually realized that availability was a really big deal, right? If you had an internet site and it wasn't available, people probably never came back. So what is 99% uptime? It means that you're down about 4 to 5 days a year. Anybody? You gonna get fired for that? Probably. So if you build software and it's down for about 4 days a year, you're out of business. Because nobody's going to come back, and by the way, you're awful, and you're going to be on the Wall Street Journal, and how dare you have an availability challenge. And so now we realized that 99% wasn't good enough, so 4 days a year was bad, so we went down to about 500 minutes a year. 500 minutes a year, still going to get fired? Anybody? Yeah, everybody, right? If you're working on availability, you've seen it. You're in a meeting and everybody's like talking about minutes and microseconds, and like this is actually not minutes and microseconds. It's like also in the category of a very long amount of time, almost half a day. 99.99. Anybody? 50 minutes a year? 50 minutes a year about? If you look at all of them, you kind of go from like 4 to 5 days down to like, you know, hundreds of minutes down to 50 minutes. 50 minutes, anybody starting to feel better? It's about 5 minutes a month. Do you think that there's any discussions about 5 minutes a month? It depends on what site you're on. So my cutepetfreeanimal.com, probably 5 minutes a month, who cares? Amazon.com, 5 minutes a month probably matters, right? We're probably going to be debating about why 5 minutes. And that could be millions of dollars. So what about the fact that we're all striving for this when you look at the abilities? Now, I'm showing you all these numbers, right? This is how developers talk, because they've been trained to talk that way, and they've been trained to talk that way since the 1970s. And even before that, I've been like going back and looking, and it turns out that in like 1884, there were all these papers on quality. And over the years, there's a really large amount of body of work around this, and it's an amazing amount of work, such that I guess people really care about it. And somewhere along the lines, security was actually kind of positioned as safety, And those articles, they started being really interesting at first, and then as quality became a bigger driver and you saw the age of computers, that became interesting too. So I'm giving you a history lesson on purpose because I'm going to actually reveal to you some interesting things that I think will change your mind. And also I'm going to show you what we've learned about securability. So here's all the ilities. I didn't pull all 11 up there because they made my slide look really yucky, and well, I like pretty things. So we're going to go with this. And you notice like usability, availability, portability, scalability, extensibility, all the ilities, right? You're starting to see the ilities. Anything that really matters to a developer, apparently stick ility on the back of it. They love it. Teach them how to use it. They love it. And that's great, right? So availability. How big is this problem for the world? Anybody? How many millions, billions, zillions? Anybody? Huge? Massive, right? It's about a $4.5 billion problem for the world, according to one study that I've been like looking for. And by the way, and I have all the links in here if you want, if you're interested in any of the materials, there's a whole bunch of supplemental that I can provide. It's even got its own link, so I'll send it to you if you're looking for it. And 4.5 billion, it's a big deal, right? It's a lot of software downtime. That's a lot of money lost. I actually thought it was going to be much bigger. I'm like, wow, people yell about $4.5 billion problem. Okay, that's a big deal. But you know what? That's after there was all this work done. Guess what? If we were at 99%, this would be a really, really bazillionaire big problem, and we might not even be talking about the internet anymore because maybe it just doesn't even exist, because how dare we be down for 5 days a year, right? Would you be really upset if you're if the machine that was keeping you alive was down for five days a year? Anybody? Right?
Well, no, I'd be upset.
You might be dead, right? It's keeping you alive, right? What about 5 minutes a year? You can maybe survive it. Maybe. It depends on if they're all the 5 minutes are at the same time. Seconds might not matter if it's a breathing machine. What about a heart machine, right? You're starting to kind of grok what this is interesting, right? And so I said, all right, what about security? How big is the security problem? Anybody ever get yelled at about security? Developers get yelled at about security? Interesting. Only when it breaks? Are you sure that developers actually get yelled at for that? Or do the security people?
Just before I called the FBI.
Oh, okay. Fair? Yeah. Okay, cool, awesome. I think it's starting to change. I've seen more developers yelled at for security in the recent months and years than I ever have. Now, what's interesting is this cat follows me around from literally conference to conference, really pissed at me about like doing this to security, but I'm gonna do it anyways. Securability, I'm gonna do it. That's right, I stuck ility on the end of it. I had to look for like something to like bridge it because it was securability, and that just didn't sound good. So I'm like, well, it's the ability to do security or the ability to secure your software, right? So essentially it's securability. So if you're gonna invent a word, you might as well invent another word and then invent another one, and well, that seems to be my thing, so I'm inventing yet another word, and everybody can hate me because how dare you? But when it comes down to it, the concept behind this is really about how do we actually make things better? So it's $600 billion worth of a problem. Whoa. We're not yelling about it enough. It's actually more than 100x the other problem. And somehow we haven't spent enough time on it, and it hasn't gotten back into the ilities, and we haven't looked at that 1970s paper and said, hey, by the way, did you consider that there might be like adversaries out there or people who might care about making money off of this? It's a $600 billion problem. And I did get that number from another study. And so, you know, I'm not even going to bother with all the numbers of studies and things that I've been doing, but I will tell you in somewhere in the 2020 time frame, you're going to see something really cool from me, and I'm not even going to spoil it yet, but I'm going to just tell you. I'm super excited about numbers, and I'm really excited about all the trends that are going on out there, and the reason why is because this group of people is becoming super relevant in a way that I've never seen before. Because we are actually representing a new world of capability that has to become mandated in companies so that this problem gets smaller. I would love to say that instead of it being a $600 billion problem, it's a $6 billion problem, because we spent time on making it an ility, and we actually got people to care about it, and we could make it relevant. So here we go. Climate change. I decided to bring the weather into this because why not? Or climate change, why not? Because if you're going to bring up something relevant and do something interesting, why does climate change matter to security people? Why does climate change matter to developers? Why does climate change matter to businesses? What's interesting is in the last few years, climate change actually matters for a lot of reasons. It's driving a lot more theft and cybersecurity problems. So let's zoom in just on the last 5 years. And you'll notice there's no purple squares, and the purple squares represent a little bit about security. It turns out that we're seeing more and more global cybersecurity problems and attacks related to the fact that, by the way, when apparently a flood comes, there's actually opportunities like you can see bad guys actually looking to get money off of people who want to give money to charity for reasons to help, right? So you see all of this activity. You also see people being taken advantage of. And you also see hacking happening at an unprecedented level because people are trying to feed their families. And I thought that was really interesting because it told me that some of the trends that I'm seeing in all of this data that I've been poring over for years, it's becoming even more relevant. That $600 billion problem will probably double in the next few years because it's not being controlled, because we're not going back to where we lost the fight. We're not going back to the point at which we actually lost the ability to build security and effectively because we don't have the ability to influence the masses at the level we need to. And what's interesting about that is if you look across the world, it's epidemic. You're seeing so many different places in the world being affected in this way. And so how did I bring it all back to this whole climate change thing? Why is this even relevant? Well, it tells me that adversaries are on the rise, and even good people are starting to find the ability to feed their families in ways that we never expected as an industry. And that motivation is changing the game in ways that we don't expect. What if it's not just quality? What if it actually matters in ways that we're really not even talking about in the right way? So, did you know that anybody can learn how to hack now? And in many cases, we're teaching them, but how do you actually secure something if you don't teach it? And so you have this really interesting balancing act between we're actually teaching a lot of people how to do things against software that we need to be able to justify to be able to bring more headcount and talent. Did you hear there's a 1 million person problem when it comes to hiring into cybersecurity? We have to be training, and yet we're also fueling the other side of this equation. And so it's really interesting. I put a bunch of stuff up here. They're amazing articles. I've taught some of the best and brightest I've ever met in the cybersecurity industry just by pointing them at a few things on this list. And by the way, this is not the only list. Many of you, if you're vendors, you actually have some of these lists too. And I could go on and on for all the different resources that are out there for people to learn how to do this. It's amazing wealth of capability. So what about the other opportunities? People are going out to the internet now and they're pulling in more and more packages directly off the internet. We're actually building software at unprecedented levels. We're seeing scale and speed and all these things, right? Well, what's interesting about that is how are we really getting ahead when it comes to security, and what are we doing to measure it? Well, the opportunities become boundless. You start to look at more and more opportunities. Lots of surveys. We're seeing phishing at unprecedented levels. We're seeing cryptocurrency mining, all these different things, and they all play into the fact that people are making mistakes in how they build software. Not just in the software itself, but in how they put it together, and how they put business logic together, in how they bring all of this to a rumination. And then all of a sudden, the opportunities seem mindlessly big. A $600 billion problem, isn't that just what we're hearing about? Maybe it's actually bigger than we've anticipated. Maybe it's bigger than the studies know. I'm studying 5,000 companies right now and $350 billion in security revenue. And what I'm finding is that there's so much information out there that we're not even seeing, that we're not even processing as security practitioners in a way that helps us to understand that that cross-site scripting vulnerability isn't small, it's absolutely massive, it's a big deal, and we're not even talking about it in the right ways. Anybody use RASP? You should be. If you're not, go back to your company. It's one of those things you need to put in. It's eye-opening. is absolutely amazing how much your applications are being attacked, and they're being attacked in really interesting ways. I'm seeing more and more capabilities by adversaries that are learning how to do things and are building tools and TTPs that are going after what I call the rabbit hole of the security world, which is application security. When you look at everything else, you see CVEs for port 21, and you see protocol problems, and you see all this stuff. And when it comes down to it, what is amazing about our industry in application security is that port 80 and 443, they're everywhere. They're ubiquitous. And by the way, the problems are complex. If you look at the complexity that has actually exploded since the internet revolution, we're seeing more and more people have more opportunity to do bad things because it's hidden in a couple of ports. And we don't have the right tools to be able to help us to get the instrumentation we need to be able to make a difference. As an application security professional, wouldn't you like to know that the thing you just found that you told somebody to fix is getting attacked, so that you could make it more relevant for them because you want to get them to fix it? How many of your things actually get fixed fast? I can tell you, mine get fixed pretty fast, and the reason why is because I've got the instrumentation and I go after it every time. I can't convince anybody without that data. I'm a data-driven person. Everything I do is data-related. And so this is what we're protecting. We're protecting not only where we live, we're protecting all the capabilities, the software that runs this, and all of the future opportunities that our children have. And when I look at that, I'm like, the opportunities seem endless, and we spend all of our time on the opportunity side of this, and we don't look at the root cause of all these things. And so breaches really feel like this. Anybody feel like their company could end up on the Richter scale at any given time? Remember I said that my company, my pointy-headed boss really wants me to solve for test coverage? And I bring it all the way back to what I said earlier. Are you talking about doing stock prediction? Because security has always been surprising. We aren't actually getting ahead because we don't have a few things that we need. So you got to figure out how to bound your decisions. And what's interesting about a test coverage plan and a test coverage capability is that when you bound something, you can be more effective at it. You can actually get ahead of it. And so apparently, and I've done some studying on this, when you have unbounded decisions, you're almost not going to make very much headway because there's all these ethereal things that you have to be thinking about. But when you bound a decision, when you put it in a box and you have boundaries around it, you can do something with it, right? That's actually a really interesting position, because did you know that as an application security professional, your job is to help people make better decisions? So you've got to be able to put all the right data into that box in the right way so that they can actually do something with it. So we decided to do this thing called the security hierarchy of needs. And yes, I have been trolled in many ways. And I can tell you, I would love for somebody to come up with something better. Please, I'll start talking about that. But for the time being, we'll use mine just for, giggles. Encryption, authentication. I didn't put authorization in authentication. There's a lot of reasons why, but I'm sure I'm going to eventually add it there at some point. Logging, asset management, and zoning and containment. Those are the 5 things that when you bound them, they make a principal difference to your application, your systems, your protocols, your business. And so bounding them in a way that actually brings this whole picture together makes it so you can do things like, hey, all those OWASP things, aren't they just really input validation problems? Where did those go? And I've had a bunch of debates about where they go, and it turns out that most of the stuff is at the zoning and containment level, because if you actually protected it by a firewall, well, it's not that available. It's only available internally. There's all sorts of reasons and rationale. And if you're interested in this model, I've done a talk on it at the CSA. I'm in the middle of writing a bunch of papers about all these things. They're starting to get published. And I got to tell you, finding a way to bound decisions is the way that allows us to participate and share. Because what if you're having a zoning and containment problem? You're not talking about the thing that just hit you. You're talking about a general category about, hey, can you talk to me a little bit about how you do zoning and containment for some of your OWASP problems? That's a really different conversation, because there's a lot of different techniques and tools and capabilities that when mapped to this can make you more successful. So the other thing you have to do for measurement requirements is you have to actually go talk to developers. Turns out they care. What's interesting, and by the way, I actually started as a developer, so I kind of like have to have this fight with myself internally, and it's really, really brutal. Sometimes this side wins, and sometimes that side wins, but all the time I'm actually realizing that most of the time I'm right. So what's interesting about that is you go and talk to folks, and it turns out that in the intersection here, the metric we want to use has to be actionable. Anybody got any metrics that are non-actionable? I have 5,000 XYZ vulnerabilities. Actionable? Not actionable. Can you make a decision about that at the highest level of your company or the lowest level of your company? Probably not. Common, familiar, simple. I like the simple one. I realized a whole bunch of stuff about simplicity, realizing that it can actually change the world. And that last one, durability, super cool. So, securability, let me help you. This is kind of cool. Apparently, when software is actually 100% secure, you can actually say it's resilient, right? So 1 represents the simplicity of it's either 1 or it's 0, right? Well, it turns out that one of the biggest problems that we have with software is its exploitability. And what we found out by studying it for a while is that exploitability is actually the biggest thing that matters, not the only thing that matters, but the biggest needle-moving problem that you have, and everything else is a subset of that problem. And so when you look at your exploitable opportunities, how many people actually know all the assets that they have down to the libraries that they have that run in their application environment? If you can quote me a trillion-ish number, I would believe you. Nobody? Not yet? Guess what? There's companies out there that need to be born to solve that problem for us, because it's what we have to do to bound this problem, right? You can't predict the stock market if you don't have all that instrumentation and measure come in, right? And so when it comes down to it, exploitability is the biggest problem we have to solve. How many tickets do you put out to your developers to fix? Why not just put the ones out that really matter right now, and then explain to them that these are the ones that are gonna matter later? And if you center it around exploitability, what's interesting is people stop fighting about it, because there is a realization that exploitability is one of the most important problems that we have to solve. So what's that break down into? Because you put one word up there and everybody wants to know what's underneath it. And oh, by the way, I've been getting down that rabbit hole into these things called resources. Now, apparently, like different companies have different names for what a resource is. You might have heard component, entity. There's no standard out there apparently for figuring out what a resource is that we want to test. So the first problem is, can we all just agree on some word? I think that's the first problem. What is it? Is it a resource? Is it a URL? What is it? What are we going to go after, right? So what's interesting is exploitable targets, total exploitable opportunities. What is a total exploitable opportunity? It means that you have to know what your resources are and where all the exploitability is in those resources, and then you have to go after it. So the stuff that you guys do, if you're a pen tester, is you're actually popping the stack, essentially. You're actually going after and getting that exploited target to come up. You got a ticket, you have a document, whatever it is that you're pointing out, that is the thing that's actually some of the most valuable here. Now, I've never met a company that didn't have an exploitable opportunity out there, because people actually go into that category too, and there's a whole bunch of other resources that are out there, and like I said, you have to describe this in the right way. So how do you get to 5 nines in security? Did you know that most of the industry right now is at 99.8 if you're doing it really well? And I would question who's doing it really well. My gauge on that is when you look at some of the stuff that's out by Symantec, they talk about this email study that they did, and apparently 1 in 531 emails has something bad in it, or is attractive in a bad way, or has some sort of attachment that's actually a bad attachment. 1 in 531 actually equates to 99.86, which is interesting because we get back to it. It's really only 2 nines. And remember I told you at the very beginning that that's 5 days? Now I'm going to say 86 is actually better than not having the 86 there, so we're not going to get there. But it's not 99.99, right? And it's not 99.9, it's actually 99.86. That's kind of scary. That means that we're actually suffering in ways that we don't even realize and haven't contemplated. And somehow it's good enough. But we're missing $600 billion in opportunity in the security industry. So how do you break that down? How do you get there? Two things. That guy was right, test coverage matters, and we're gonna have to go after it. But apparently resource coverage matters too. You're starting to see new companies popping up around resources, right? They're interesting. They're starting to tell us that we don't know what we have and we can't test everything if we don't know what we have. So we better spend some effort and some time and some money on that problem. As a tester, I can tell you, knowing what I have to test is part of the battle. And then figuring out what tests I have to apply to it, also part of the battle. And this is the area of the industry that has kind of been left to the wasteland. We aren't doing it yet. We need to be doing it. And it has to become the thing that we focus on. So what does that look like? What does resource coverage look like? You gotta find it, you gotta catalog it, and you gotta track it. So who has a CMDB? Who has a CMDB that has everything in it? Yeah, I know. Some people, like in the application security community, we're kind of like cynical. And by the way, CMDBs, if you've ever gone in there, you're like, it's not really a thing. And it doesn't really help me because when you go in there, you find out like, hey, this product isn't actually the right product. I went to that URL. It wasn't actually there. It was actually this other thing. And most of the time what I find is that since I worked on a CMDB at one point in my career, and oh my God, thank God I got out of that, I realized that along the way, we actually find out that most CMDBs don't actually hit the sweet spot for a security professional. And they're not right, and they don't provide us that capability for pathing in and finding the things that need to be found. And the other thing that you have to do is you have to have test coverage. You gotta have a frame for test coverage, which is why we went after security hierarchy of needs. It's one of the reasons that we actually are doing okay at mapping things. We're also looking to advance our capabilities. So once you get in there, you're gonna find all your CVEs, you're gonna find all your techniques. The OWASP group provides a tremendous amount of detail and information. You're gonna catalog that puppy, and then you're gonna be like, all right, so I tested all that stuff. And guess what? Your job's not done. Your job is to figure out how to weaponize. And there's a part of actually bringing test coverage to life, which is not just running all of these scanners and capabilities out there, but actually zoning in on what makes your company different. We can't buy scanners that are actually going to help us to make them relevant to our specific companies. We have to actually do things to be able to advance our understanding of the test coverage problems that we each have individually. And that is a bigger deal, right? So apparently we should be sharing because my test coverage and your test coverage and your test coverage, they are all going to be different test coverages. But what if we could actually make it easier on each other by sharing the tests that we're going to be advancing? What if every single person in the room should have to register a CVE? We did 8 last year. In a group that never had done any before. We did 8. We're gonna try and triple that number this year. And we're starting to get more skills and we're finding more capabilities and we're finding more tools and more partners and more design partners to go after this problem. So what's it all boiled down to? Why do you care? Why are you listening to me today? Well, it turns out that if you have a P0 incident, you're gonna get pawned. You better clean it up now, right? That's the equation. If you want to stop fighting with people and make it so something's relevant for them, a P0 is priority 0. You've got a priority, it's today, it's already something available for an adversary or it is being attacked by an adversary, and it's that relevant that that thing that's gonna crush you is actually that important. So when you measure it, you're gonna figure out, oh, well, this is really a big deal. So how does it all play out? And what about your 5 nines? So most of the time, it's, you might find one thing here and there, hopefully. And by the way, if you're finding more than one thing, you should work on that because that means that you've got lots of opportunity, right? But let's just say that in one resource, and I'm going to talk about the smallest resource probable. Let's just say we have a 3,000 line component out there. And we find a problem, but it turns out we find a problem and actually there were 5 possible opportunities, right? We all talk about probability and likelihood. Anybody like to use risk equations, impact and likelihood? Yeah, I'm not there anymore. I actually just really focus on likelihood. If I can break it, it probably should get fixed. Because the impact of it is uncalculable at this point in the complexity algorithm. When you really get down to risk and quantification, it used to work because it was a small number of things, and so when you did the risk calculation, it made a lot of sense. But now with complexity factors in play, it's really likelihood. So if I can pawn your stuff as an application security professional and I can convince you as a developer to fix it, does it really matter if it was a $1 billion problem or a $10,000 problem? Because if somebody gets into my application and potentially they can do a bunch of other things with it, then really ultimately all I got to do is convince people to fix things. And then, so how do you calculate exploitability from that? So we're going to take that one, we're going to divide by 5.2. Anybody scared? Turns out if you do the magical equation, you're at 80% securability for that component part of 3,000 lines of code. Would a developer get fired? Where's your threshold? And that's an important element, right? Our businesses have to get to the point where we're actually talking about these things. Is 5 nines what we want for securability? I don't know. But at least I'm starting the conversation, and it is uncomfortable. And the reason it is uncomfortable is that 80% is a lot of problem. And if you let that just sit, for how long will you let that sit? So if you trend this over time, your software stays at 80%. Is that something you want to buy? What if the car you buy had 80% securability? Anybody ready? Yeah? No, it'd probably not actually get bought by you. These are interesting and unique arguments, but I believe that they're the relevant ones that we have to be having when it comes to security. And when you change it to no nines, right, and people could get fired for this, they're not getting fired for being on the Wall Street Journal. They're getting fired because they don't understand how to do the things they need to be doing. And we need to figure out how to teach them to do those things so that they can take responsibility. But by the way, when you put that number in front of somebody who doesn't understand security, it actually gets really easy because what we're talking about is exploitability. Don't let exploitability happen. When you're looking at this kind of chart for your company, right? And you're actually talking about, hey, how are our nines doing right now? When you're at this level, it becomes eye-opening. And it's amazing when you start to see that securability can be an effective measure. The bars become all the things that you could have that were your exploitable opportunities. And in this case, I feel bad for this company. This is not my company, thank God. But this is a company that I was studying, and they were challenged by the fact that they were seeing more and more exploitable opportunity. It turns out that they actually had a firewall that was misconfigured. Wow, right? That was easy to find because Nmap, this little tiny tool, actually helped you find it. So amazing stuff, right? Why does this matter again to a developer though? I'm gonna leave you with one interesting thing, and the reason why developers will really love this. Because if they focus on fixing exploitability and you wanted to shift left, shifting left, looking at that 1970s paper, getting to the point where you're really having a conversation with a developer is all about saving their regression period. And if you want to get to the point where you're saving your regression period, you're going to go through this process with 99.9 and realize that you can even predict 99.9 because you can predict what an exploitable opportunity is. And I believe that we're kind of onto something, because when you sit down to really look at how you're doing, if you've got a team of people and you've got the right scanners and the right vendors and the right people in the mix to make software harder and more resilient to attackers, you actually get to the point where we can actually take that $600 billion problem and turn it into a $6 billion problem, and potentially even less, because we're focused on it in the right way. So your tolerance level, so if you look at it, your exploitability is your tolerance, can be anything for your company. In some companies, I've actually heard that their exploitability threshold is pretty high. They worry about it when, on the other side, when they're gonna basically block all of the activities and actions through chasing lateral movement. So their strategy might be, hey, we're good up until this point, and then we can't actually chase the bad guys out of our systems fast enough. But the conversation becomes different, right? Because you're actually now talking about what can we tolerate? what can we sustain with? How are we fighting against adversaries? And the number change is magical because executives understand it because they're already dealing with availability. So going to something that has 5 nines can help. Now, we're always looking at like the 5 nines to try and figure out like what does 0.9 really mean to us? What does 0.99 really mean to us? And we've been studying a lot on this, but what we've effectively found is that by measuring exploitability into it, really developers now own it. When you publish through a CI/CD process and an exploitable opportunity comes through, they don't want to go on the other side of that equation because they run into my team who's going to basically exploit the opportunity. And we've been building playbooks and all sorts of things against those capabilities. And as I've looked at all the data, there's data that matters to us, but when you look at it, it's really hard to look at until you get a framework that helps you to put it into perspective. Some vulnerabilities are never going to get weaponized, and we're spending a tremendous amount of time fixing a lot of stuff, but in the wrong places. Like, why wouldn't I want my developer to go fix vulnerabilities in the regression period? I think that's where they need to be fixed. So don't let your stuff come out without patches. Don't let your stuff come out. But you should run those vulnerability scanners. You should provide me with some data and make it so that I can go decide whether I can exploit them or not, or weaponize against them. One of the things that we're working on is weaponizing against things that are out there so that we can actually exploit them before somebody bad does it. A 0 day is commonly just somebody exploiting something that's already been known for a long time. Well, when it comes down to it, I think that we're talking about the fact that you mature it over time. People didn't fire their developers along the way when it was availability challenges. And the question was really, hey, does this help the equation to be able to fire somebody for bad securability? It's a way of describing it. I think that the honest truth is we're going to have to work through it as an industry, and it's going to take some time before we're going to have the tools, capabilities, and all the things that we're going to need to make that come to life. And so I don't know that anybody's going to get fired for securability problems right now, but in the future, when we get really good at it, maybe they should be. But I'm actually saying that the equation should be that you're solving for all of those problems earlier on. And I think that having a number when you're talking to management that helps to make these things come together makes it so you can have the dialogue in a different way. So at that point, the conversation is a manager is looking at an actual number, you're looking at the number too, and there's no hiding it anymore. There's no subjective opinion. There's just a number that you're moving and you're making decisions about. So it may not be the answer, and I love contrarians because it's amazing to have the conversation. So I love contrarian thought process. And I think I learn a tremendous amount from people that are really pushing to make things like this resilient. And I invite it because we're not telling you this is the answer. We're telling you it's the beginning of a conversation for sure. And I don't know that I have every answer, but I can tell you I've spent a couple of years chasing that pointy-headed boss's perspective. And I think he's kind of right. And at the first part of it, I was like, I thought he was mad. But now I actually know that some of the things that are left out there from a security industry perspective need to be solved.
Towards the end of your conversation, you talked about not all risks are created equal.
That's right.
Meaning not all vulnerabilities. So does your mathematical model actually factor in CVSS scoring or something else to give you that relative risk?
Yeah, so we use the security hierarchy of needs. The question, I don't know if these microphones are working. The question was really, does the mathematical model actually solve for bringing it all together? What was it again?
Just a relative level of risk.
The relative level of risk.
Individual vulnerability, right?
Yeah, so you have a CVE scored vulnerability. How do you fit it into this model? What we realized was that all CVE vulnerabilities are not created equal. So that's the first part of the equation. Then we realized that if you use the security hierarchy of needs, that you're actually going to be talking about zoning and containment problems when you're looking at a hierarchy of needs model. Those are usually more important and the ones that actually bad guys go after. So the model it does actually solve for pulling that risk equation together, but in a different way. And the reason why is because when you look at like logs and instrumentation data, If you leave those in the equation from a security operations perspective, they blur a lot of different things. And the attacks that are happening on these other parts of the equation, they get blurred out. So if you put logging and evasion and all the other problems together in their own bucket, all the rest of them kind of show up in a different way, and you can test more effectively and more efficiently. So your exploit opportunity goes way down when you're actually controlling it that way, and your percentage for false positives goes way down. Your false negatives actually go away too, because you're able to now look at the dimensions of the problems that you're dealing with, and you're able to research in a different way. One more question, any? All right. I'm outside if you guys want to talk. Thank you.